The memorial wall was the first thing I looked for on any base that had one, and this base had a good one. A low slab of polished granite set into a rise of mowed grass behind the headquarters building, angled so the morning sun would come across it and not straight into it. I got there at 0540, a full hour before I needed to be anywhere, because I have learned over 22 years that the day takes whatever you do not defend, and the thing I defend is the few minutes before it starts. It was March, and still cold in the way that coastal mornings are cold, a damp that gets into the seams of your cammies and stays there. The grass was wet enough to darken the toes of my boots. I walked the length of the wall slowly, reading names I did not know, the way you read a book in a language you almost speak, and then I stopped where I always stop, which is at the names from the year that took the most from me. And I found the one I was looking for, even though I knew it would not be there. It is never there. He belongs to a different wall, 3 states away, and I know that, and I check anyway, because checking is a kind of prayer for people who do not pray anymore. Isaac Mercer. I said it under my breath, the way you say a thing you do not want the wind to take before you are finished with it, and then I put 2 fingers against the cold stone over a stranger's name and I let the minute be his. I did not cry. I have not cried at a wall in a very long time. What I did was the thing I do, which is to stand there until the weight settled into the place it lives and stopped moving around. And then I squared my cover and turned and walked toward the headquarters building, where a very loud man I had not yet met was about to decide who I was. I was 41 years old that morning. I had enlisted in 2004 at 19, a rifleman, an 0311, because I did not want a job that let me pretend the country was not at war. I had made sergeant by 2010. I had been commissioned in 2012 through a program that takes enlisted Marines who have proven something and gives them a chance to prove it again with a different weight on their shoulders. I was a major now, an 04, and I was reporting in that day as the incoming operations officer of an infantry battalion that was 3 weeks from a pre-deployment field exercise, and, after that, from the real thing. I had spent the drive up the coast the night before thinking about the plan they were building, because the commander had sent it to me ahead of my arrival, and it was thin. It was thin in exactly the places that thin plans are always thin, the places that do not show up in a briefing and show up in a river city at 0440 when the wall comes apart. I was going to have to fix it without making anyone feel stupid, which is most of what the job is, and I had been turning that over for 100 miles. What I had not been thinking about, because you never think about the thing that actually happens, was the Combat Operations Center, and the gunnery sergeant running the brief table inside it, and the way he would look at my plain cammies and my unfamiliar face and the folder under my arm and decide, out loud, in front of the room, that I was lost. The Combat Operations Center of a battalion getting ready to deploy is a particular kind of loud. It is not chaos. It is the productive, overlapping loud of 40 people who all know their piece and are saying it at once. Radios and map boards and the smell of burned coffee and dry erase marker, the low roar of an organization warming its engine. I stood in the hatch for a moment and let it wash over me because I love that sound. I have loved it my whole life, and I wanted a second of it before I became someone in the room instead of someone watching it. Then a voice came off the brief table at the far end, pitched to carry, the voice of a man who has learned that volume is a kind of authority and has never been in a room where it was not. "You lost, ma'am." I looked over. The gunnery sergeant at the head of the table was maybe 40, built thick through the shoulders and going a little heavy at the middle in the way that happens to infantrymen when they move to a staff, with a face that had been handsome and was now mostly certain. He had the posture of a man who owned the table, which until 9 o'clock that morning he did. His name tape said, Prosser. He looked at me the way you look at a delivery. "Family Readiness is the building with the flowers out front," he said. And a couple of the Marines at the table smiled, the automatic smile you give the senior man's joke. "Big fella at the desk'll point you the right way." A young first lieutenant near the middle of the table, a watch officer by the look of her, straightened up and opened her mouth. Her name tape said Amory. "Gunny, I think." "I've got it, ma'am," Prosser said over her, not unkindly. "The way you talk over someone you have decided does not know the room." He turned back to me. "Something we can help you with?" I have been in the Marine Corps for 22 years. I have been talked over by better men than Gunnery Sergeant Prosser, and I have been talked over by worse. And I have learned that the first thing to do when a room decides what you are is nothing. You do nothing. You do not spend the correction early. You let it sit in the account, and you draw on it later when it is worth more. "I'm here for the 0900, I said, which was true, and which told him nothing, and I walked to the empty chair at the foot of the table, and I set my folder down, and I sat. It is a small thing, taking a seat, but there is a way of taking a seat that tells a room you have not decided to give it up, and I took the seat that way. And I saw Prosser register it and file it under something he would deal with later. And then he went back to the board, and the brief rolled on around me, and I sat at the foot of the table where they had put me, and I read the plan pinned to the wall over their heads. It was thin. I had known it would be thin. But it is one thing to read a thin plan alone in a car, and another to sit under it in the room that believes it is finished. And I felt the old familiar thing start up in my chest. The thing that is not anger exactly, that is closer to grief. The recognition that people were going to be asked to carry a plan into a place where the plan would not hold, and that the fixing of it had just become my job, and that the first thing standing between me and the fixing of it was a man who thought I was lost. I want to tell you who I actually was that morning, because the gap between that and the chair at the foot of the table is the whole story, and because I have learned that the gap is not something to be ashamed of. It is just the arithmetic of a long time in. 20 minutes after I sat down, the brief broke, and I went to report to the commander, and Lieutenant Colonel Halsey stood up from behind his desk to meet me, which not every commander does, and put out his hand. "Major Whitlock," he said, "I asked for you by name." "Sir! Sit." He came around the desk instead of staying behind it, which told me most of what I needed to know about him, and he leaned against the front of it with his arms crossed and looked at me with the frank relief of a man who has been carrying something alone and has just been handed help. "I'll be honest with you. Half my staff has never deployed. They are smart, they work hard, and they have never once had a plan meet the enemy and come apart in their hands. You have. More than once. I need the person who has been on the wrong end of a good plan going bad." "I've had that experience, sir," I said. He smiled a little at the understatement. "I read your record before I asked for you. I know what you have." He let that sit for a second, and then he did the decent thing, which was to not make me talk about it. "Your operations chief is a gunnery sergeant named Prosser. Good Marine, been with the battalion 2 years, runs a tight watch floor. He is going to be your right hand on that floor." He paused. "He can be a lot of man in a room." "I noticed," I said, and Halsey laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and I understood that he had not yet heard how the morning had gone at the brief table, and that I was not going to be the one to tell him. Before I left his office, he asked me one more thing, almost offhand, the way commanders test the people they are about to trust with everything. He asked me what I thought of the plan. He had sent it to me ahead of time, and he wanted to know if I had actually read it or just skimmed it on the drive, and I understood the test, and I did not flatter him, and I did not ambush him. I told him it was a good skeleton with 2 places that would get people killed and about 6 that would get people frustrated, and that the frustrating ones did not matter and the killing ones did. And I named the 11 minutes of no radio and the casualty route that would be underwater in the rain. And I watched him go very still, because he had not seen either of them, and neither had anyone on his staff, and he had just learned in 90 seconds why he had asked for me by name. He did not get defensive. He said quietly, "Fix them." And that was the whole of the conversation, and I have served men who would have argued and men who would have been wounded. And he was neither. He just said, "Fix them," and I knew then that the year was going to be all right, no matter how the morning had started. He said it like a kindness, all of it, and I took it as one. But I want you to understand what it felt like from the inside, because from the inside, it did not feel like being praised. It felt like being counted. He had said, "You have done this for real," and to him that was a compliment, and to me it was just the number on a page, the number of times I have watched a plan meet the world and lose, the number of names I check on walls. You do not get to be the person the colonel asks for by name without paying for the sentence. I have paid for it. The bill comes due every morning at 0540 in front of a slab of granite. I walked the Combat Operations Center after I left his office, slow, reading the workup plan pinned across the map boards, and I found the thin places one by one. There was a gap in the plan where a unit would be out of radio range for 11 minutes during a movement, and no one had written what they were supposed to do during those 11 minutes, which meant that in a bad moment, they would do the worst thing, which is guess. There was a casualty evacuation route that looked clean on the map and crossed a low spot that would be underwater in the rainy season, which it was about to be. Small things, killing things, the kind of thing you only see if you have watched the small thing kill. I did not say any of it out loud. I did not walk up to the board and start marking it in front of the staff who had built it, because there is no faster way to lose a room than to be right at them in public on your first morning. I noted it. I have a good memory for the shape of a plan, better than my memory for faces, and I filed each thin place where I could reach it later, and I kept my expression to myself. I learned to keep my expression to myself from a staff sergeant named Ruiz. In a different war, when I was the youngest and the least likely thing in his squad, he had a way of being right that did not require anyone else to be wrong out loud. A way of correcting a boot that left the boot's dignity intact and somehow made him better at the same time, and I had studied it the way you study a thing you know you are going to need. He told me once, cleaning a weapon on a cot in a plywood hut, that the Marines who last are not the loud ones and are not the quiet ones. They are the ones who know exactly when to be which. He said most people pick one and stick with it their whole lives because picking is easier than judging, and he said the whole trick of leading is the judging. I did not fully understand him at 19. I understand him now. I was doing the judging, standing at that board, deciding that this was a morning to be quiet, and I did not yet know how loud the morning was about to get, or that the being loud was going to be done for me, in the worst possible voice, by the one man in the room who thought he already knew the answer. There is a particular loneliness in walking into a room that has decided about you, and I have felt it enough times that it no longer surprises me, but it never stops being lonely. You carry a thing that would rearrange the room in an instant, and you carry it quietly. And you let the room be wrong about you a little longer because being right at people is not the same as being right. And the difference between those two things is most of what I know. While I was reading the board, Prosser was running a rehearsal at the table behind me, and I listened to him do it. And here's the thing I have to tell you honestly. He was good. He was loud, and he was certain, and he was also good. He knew the watch floor. He knew where every piece was, and he moved them well, and the young Marines under him were sharp because he had made them sharp. He was not a fool. He was a competent, confident senior non-commissioned officer who had decided, on a glance, that I was a tourist. And the worst part, the part that made the morning heavy instead of simple, was that he was exactly the kind of Marine you would want in that chair if he had not decided that. I stood at that board, and I felt the shape of what was coming, and I did not want it. People think that a person in my position wants the reveal, wants the room to find out, wants the moment. I did not want the moment. I wanted the plan to be good, and I wanted to get through the day, and I wanted, more than either of those, to not have to spend the worst night of my life as a coin to buy a gunnery sergeant's respect. But I have learned that you do not always get to choose the currency. Sometimes the only thing a room will take is the thing you least want to give. I need to take you back 16 years, because the chair at the foot of the table and the wall at 0540 and the folder under my arm all come from the same morning, and you cannot understand what happened at that brief table without it. It was 2010. I was 25 years old and a sergeant, a squad leader in a river city in the western desert during the part of that war that does not make it into the movies because it was mostly waiting, punctuated by the specific horror of the times it was not. My squad held a corner building on the edge of a district we were trying to keep open, a 2-story house with a courtyard wall, and across a narrow street, a platoon held a larger position, and the whole arrangement depended on the corner. If the corner held, the street was covered and the platoon was safe. If the corner folded, the street opened and the platoon could be come at from behind. The attack came at 0440. I know the time because I looked at my watch when the radio went to noise. An old habit, the habit of a person who wants to be able to tell the truth about it later. It was coordinated and it was close, closer than anything I had been in before. Mortars first, to put our heads down, and then men in the street under the mortars. And the courtyard wall came apart under a volley I still hear when a door slams wrong, and my squad leader, a staff sergeant named Ruiz, who had taught me most of what I knew, was hit in the first 30 seconds and did not get up. There was no one left to give the order. That is the sentence I have said to boards and to counselors and to the inside of my own skull 10,000 times. There was no one left to give the order, so I gave it. I put my Marines on the windows and the wall, and I got on the radio, and I told the platoon across the street that we had it. We had the corner. Hold your side and let us have ours. And then I did the only job there was, which was to keep the corner from folding for as long as it took for the light to come. Holding a corner is not the thing people imagine when they imagine combat. It is not a charge, and it is not a stand in the cinematic sense. It is a long, ugly, mechanical piece of work, a matter of angles and ammunition and refusing to let a single window go dark. And it is done mostly on your knees behind whatever wall is left, moving from position to position, because there are never enough Marines for all the positions, so you become several Marines by moving fast between the places that matter. I did the arithmetic of the wall over and over in the dark, which window was open, which Marine was low on rounds, where the pressure was building, and I moved to meet it. And when I could not be in two places, I chose the place that would kill us fastest if it folded, and I let the other place wait, and I prayed the other place would forgive me. That is the job. Nobody puts it on a citation because there is no clean way to say it. You keep the corner by choosing, over and over in the dark, which of your Marines gets your help this second and which one has to hold alone for 10 more, and you carry every one of those choices for the rest of your life, whether the Marine lived or not. Lance Corporal Isaac Mercer was at the window on my right. He was 21. He was from a small town in a flat state, and he had a laugh that did not fit the size of him. Too big, too easy. A laugh that made you feel like the war was a thing that was happening to other people even while it was happening to you. He fed me magazines when my hands were too busy to reach my own, and he talked the whole time, low and steady, the running commentary of a man keeping two people breathing by refusing to let the room go silent. "You hold the corner, Sergeant," he said at one point when the second push came and I was trying to be in 3 places on the wall at once. "I've got the window, go." I went. I held the corner. I moved along the wall and I put fire where it needed to be. And I dragged a wounded Marine named Toomey out of the courtyard and back into the house by the drag handle on his kit while Mercer covered the window and kept talking, kept that big, easy laugh in his voice even then. And the corner held. The corner held until the second volley came through the window on my right, and then it was quiet on that side of the room in a way that I understood before I turned around. And when I turned around, Isaac Mercer was gone in a sentence, in less time than it takes to say his name. And the corner still held because I made it hold, because there was no one left to give the order, and the order was hold. After the second volley, there were 3 of us still up in that house, myself and a Marine named Toomey, who was hit in the leg but could still work a rifle if I propped him, and a private whose name I will not use because his family reads things now, and I do not want to put that night in front of them again. I moved Toomey to Mercer's window because it had to be covered, and there was no one else to cover it, and I told him to hold it, and he held it, bleeding, propped against the frame, for the last 2 hours before the light. I have thought a great deal about what it cost that 19-year-old to sit at the window where his friend had just died and keep it covered, and I have never found a citation big enough for it, and there was not one, because he was just doing the job, and the job does not come with a medal every time it is done. It mostly comes with nothing. It mostly comes with a long life of remembering. We held until first light, when the relief came up the street, and the platoon across the way had not been touched from behind. Not once, because the corner held, and 30-some Marines went home to their families over the next years because a 25-year-old sergeant and a 21-year-old lance corporal held a corner in a river city, and one of them did not. When the relief came up the street at first light, I remember standing in the courtyard among the pieces of the wall in a gray flat morning light that made everything look like a photograph of itself, and a lieutenant from the relief was saying something to me that I could not hear, asking me if I was hit because I was covered in other people's work, and I could not answer him. Not because I was in shock exactly, but because I was doing a thing I have done at the end of every bad night since, which is counting, taking the roll in my head. And I got to Mercer, and the count stopped and would not go forward. And the lieutenant put his hand on my shoulder, and I let him. And that was the whole of it. That was the moment. There was no music. There was a gray morning and a broken wall and a count that would not go forward. And then there was the rest of my life, which I have spent making the count mean something. They gave me the Navy Cross for it. The Navy Cross is the second highest thing this country gives a Marine for valor, and there are men who have earned it and not come home to be handed it, and I know exactly what it is and exactly what it weighs. And I keep it in the same drawer as the letters Mercer's mother sent me for the first 3 years. The letters where she thanked me and asked me to tell her again about the laugh, and I answered every one of them. And then they stopped coming, and I understood why, and I keep those in the drawer too. His mother's letters came in a careful hand on lined paper, and the first one arrived 4 months after. And she did not blame me, which was somehow harder than if she had. She thanked me. She asked me to tell her again about the laugh, because the official people had told her how he died, and none of them had known him, and she wanted the part that was him and not the part that was the war. So I wrote her about the laugh, and about the way he narrated everything, and about the time he traded a week of his cigarettes for a chessboard nobody knew how to use. And I mailed it, and she wrote back. And for 3 years we did that, a woman I had met once at a memorial, and me, keeping her son in sentences between us. And then the letters stopped. And I understood why they stopped, because there is a point past which remembering out loud costs more than it gives. And she had reached it, and I did not intrude on her peace. But I kept every letter, and I keep them in the drawer with the medal, so that the medal never sits alone, so that the second highest thing this country gives a Marine for valor never gets to be in that drawer without the letters from the mother of the Marine it cost. That is who was sitting at the foot of the table. That is the record that was in the folder under my arm. I did not put it there to use it. I put it there because a major reporting to a new command brings her record, that is all. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, and I had no idea that morning that a gunnery sergeant was going to reach for it as a weapon and find out what it actually was. I came back onto the watch floor a little before 9, and that is when the ground shifted, although only 2 people in the room could feel it. Sergeant Major Vandenberg came through the far hatch. A battalion sergeant major is the senior enlisted Marine in the outfit, the keeper of the standard, and the keeper of the memory. And this one was maybe 49, lean and gray and quiet in the way that the loudest job in the Marine Corps sometimes makes a man quiet. And he came through the hatch mid-stride on his way to somewhere, and then he saw my face and he stopped. He stopped the way you stop when you have walked into a room you did not expect to contain something. He looked at me and something moved across his face, recognition, and then, right behind it, a kind of careful stillness, the stillness of a man who has just understood the shape of the next 10 minutes and does not like it. He came over. He did not announce me. I want you to notice that because it matters. He could have called the room to attention. He could have said the sentence that would have ended it before it started. He did not because he was watching me, and he was old enough and good enough to wait half a second and see what I wanted. "Ma'am," he said, low, just for me. "I didn't know it was you they sent." Sergeant Major. He glanced at the brief table, at Prosser, and back at me, and I watched him do the arithmetic that I had already done, and I watched him arrive where I had arrived, which was that Gunnery Sergeant Prosser was about to walk off a cliff in front of the whole staff, and that the only question was whether someone caught him first or let him fall. He knew who I was. Of course he knew. Sergeants Major keep the names the rest of us are allowed to forget. There are a few hundred living recipients of the Navy Cross, and the senior enlisted of the Marine Corps carry those names the way a family carries the names of its dead, as a duty and a kind of pride, and Vandenberg had carried mine for 16 years without ever expecting it to walk onto his watch floor in plain cammies and get told to go find the building with the flowers out front. He started to speak. I could see the sentence forming, the sentence that would fix it cleanly and quietly, and I stopped him with the smallest shake of my head, a movement you would have missed if you were not looking for it, and he saw it, and he closed his mouth, and something in his eyes changed from alarm to something older and sadder and more like respect. He understood what I was doing. He did not like it, and he understood it, and he stepped back to the edge of the room to watch it happen, which is the hardest thing a sergeant major can do, to watch and not fix. Because here's what I had decided, standing at that map board with the thin plan over my head. Prosser was going to be my right hand on that floor for the next year, in a place where being right in public would matter, where young Marines would live or die on whether the operations chief had learned to ask before he decided. If I pulled rank and ended it now, I would win the morning and lose the year. He would obey me, and he would never respect me, and the young Marines watching would learn that rank is a thing you use to win arguments. If I let it arrive on its own, in his own voice, in front of everyone, he would never again in his life glance at a person and decide what they were. It would cost me something to let it happen. It would cost me the worst night of my life, spread out on a table as a lesson. But it would teach the thing that needed teaching, and it would teach it to more than one man. So when Prosser turned from the board and saw me back at the foot of the table and decided that the new woman needed to be put in her place before the real staff arrived for the 9 o'clock, I did not stop him. "Ma'am," he said, and the whole table heard the word ma'am done as a small unkindness, the ma'am you use as the opposite of respect. 0900 is a working brief. It's for the staff, operations, fires, logistics. He let a beat land. "You ever actually been outside the wire, or is this more of an observing thing for you?" The table did the automatic laugh. Not all of them. Amory did not laugh, and a young corporal at the far end named Ledbetter did not laugh, but enough of them did. The automatic tribute to the senior man's joke, and I sat there and took it, and I felt Vandenberg at the edge of the room hold himself very still. I have been made small in louder rooms than that one. I have been made small in rooms where the stakes were real, where being underestimated could get someone killed, and I have learned the single most important thing about it, which is that you do not spend the anger. The anger is real, and it is useful, and it is yours, and if you spend it in the moment on a sharp reply, you have nothing left when the moment that matters comes, and you have taught the room that they got to you. You bank it, you keep your face level and your hands still, and you bank the anger, and you will want it later, and you will want it clean. Go ahead and run your brief, gunnery sergeant, I said evenly. I'll wait for the 9 o'clock. He should have let it go there. A wiser man would have heard something in the evenness and let it go, but Prosser was not being wise that morning. He was being certain, and certainty does not know how to stop. He wanted the room. He had a new person who would not rise to it, and that is intolerable to a man who runs on the rise, so he pushed. Down the table, Corporal Ledbetter had put up a map overlay that was not quite right, a movement graphic with a boundary in the wrong place, the honest mistake of a young Marine still learning the trade, and Prosser turned the certainty on him. Ledbetter, what is that? Not a question. Did you even look at the graphic before you posted it? That boundary's 100 meters off. You want to tell fires to shoot into 2nd Platoon's lines? Fix it. And while you're at it, figure out how a boundary works, because right now you are a liability with a marker. The table was quiet now, the uncomfortable quiet of people watching someone younger get it, and Ledbetter's ears went red and his jaw set, and he pulled the overlay down and started fixing it with hands that were not quite steady. I watched the kid flinch, and I saw myself at 20. I saw every senior Marine who had ever decided what I was before I opened my mouth, and I saw the specific thing that Prosser could not see, which was that Ledbetter was not a liability. He was a 20-year-old learning a hard trade under a man who taught by contempt, and that in 3 years he would either be very good or very gone, depending on whether anyone showed him the other way. That is the moment I stopped thinking about getting through the day and started thinking about the year. Because the reveal that was coming was not just going to be about me, it was going to be a thing the whole room watched, and the room included a red-eared corporal who needed to learn that being right quietly outlasts being loud, and needed to learn it from someone the room had also written off so that the lesson would stick. Corporal Ledbetter, I said, and my voice was not loud, but it carried, because I have learned how to make a low voice carry. The boundary is off, but the concept of your graphic is correct. You have the main effort where it belongs. Fix the line and repost it. The idea was right. Ledbetter looked up at me, surprised, and Prosser looked at me too. And something crossed his face, the first flicker of a question. Because a tourist does not correct a movement graphic, a tourist does not know what a main effort is or where it belongs. And for just a second, I watched the certainty in his face develop a hairline crack, and then he papered over it the way certain men do, by deciding the crack was an insult. With respect, ma'am, he said, and there was no respect in it. Do you want to run my watch floor? No, I said. I want to see the 9 o'clock brief. Then let me ask you straight. He put his hands flat on the table and leaned into it, and the room went still, because everyone could feel that he had decided to end whatever this was. And the young Marines braced for it the way you brace when you know the senior man is about to swing. You walk in here in cammies with no ribbons, no idea who anyone is, and you correct my corporal like you've got the standing. So who are you? What's your background? Because from where I'm standing, you've never seen a day of what these Marines are training for. And there it was. He had asked me to my face, in front of the room, the one question I would have paid money not to answer, and I understood that the moment had arrived and that I was not going to be able to keep the worst night of my life in the drawer with the letters because a gunnery sergeant had reached into the drawer without knowing it was there. I made 2 decisions in the time it took him to say the last sentence. The first decision was that I was not going to stop him. He had asked who I was, and the answer was in the folder in front of me, and I was going to let him find it himself, in his own voice, because a truth you find yourself lands somewhere, a truth you are told never reaches. The second decision was harder, and I made it looking at his face, at the certainty in the thick shoulders and something else I had just started to notice, an age and a build, and a way of favoring one leg that snagged on a memory I could not place. The second decision was that when this was over, when the truth had done to him what it was about to do, I was not going to finish him. I was going to let it flatten him, and then I was going to help him up, because that is the difference between recognition and revenge, and I have only ever been interested in one of them. I slid the folder to the center of the table with 2 fingers. Everything I am is in there, gunnery sergeant, I said. You want to know my background? Read it. Start at the first page. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. And then he did the thing that certainty always does, which is to mistake a door for a trap it can spring. And he picked up the folder with a small grin at the table, the grin that said, "Watch me put this to bed." And he opened it. "Let's see," he said, performing it, playing to the room. Major Corinne Whitlock, officer record. He flipped the top page like a man dealing a card. "Here we go. Let's find out where the major has been hiding." He read the header of the first page aloud, and the header of the first page was the summary of an award, and he read it as a joke, the first few words done in a voice pitched for laughter. Award of the Navy Cross, he read, to Sergeant Corinne Whitlock, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary heroism. He stopped. I have watched rooms go quiet my entire career. Quiet is easy to make. You make quiet by raising your voice or by pulling out an authority or by saying a hard thing plainly. I had never, in 22 years, watched a room stand. But I watched it then, and it did not happen the way you would think. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way a wave forms, a gathering and then a break. Prosser read the header again, from the top, slower, and this time there was no performance in it, and his voice changed on the words, extraordinary heroism, the way a voice changes when a man realizes the thing in his hands is heavier than he thought. The room read his face before it read the page. First Lieutenant Amory was on her feet before I think she decided to be, chair scraping back, and then the corporal beside her, and then Ledbetter, the red-eared kid, stood up so fast his chair went over backward, and he did not reach for it, and then the whole table was rising, the scrape of chairs like a long breath let out, until the only man still sitting at that table was Gunnery Sergeant Wade Prosser, holding a folder that had started shaking very slightly in his hands. Vandenberg, at the edge of the room, had been standing the whole time. He did not need to stand, but I saw him square himself, come to the position of attention with the specific crispness that a sergeant major uses when he wants a room to understand that a thing is being honored. And the young Marines saw it too, and it told them that what they were feeling was correct. Prosser kept reading. He could not stop now. The citation is short, they are always short, a paragraph, and it named the river city, and it named the year, 2010, and it named the corner and the coordinated attack and the squad leader who fell and the sergeant who took the corner when there was no one left to give the order, and it named the platoon across the street that was not overrun, and it was on the word platoon that the last of the color went out of Gunnery Sergeant Prosser's face, because he knew that platoon. He had been in that platoon. He had been a boot lance corporal on the far side of that narrow street at 0440 in 2010, 19 years old, and certain he was going to die when the corner started to go and the corner had not gone, and he had gone home, and he had told the story 100 times. In 100 bars in the years since, the story of the night his platoon should have been overrun and was not, and in all those 100 tellings he had never once known the name of the sergeant who held the corner. He knew it now. He was holding it in his hands. He looked up from the page at my face, and I watched him place it, watched 16 years collapse into a single second, watched the loud, certain man understand that the woman he had just called a tourist was the reason he had a life to be certain in. Nobody said anything for what felt like a long time and was probably 5 seconds. The watch floor hummed on behind us, radios and the air handlers, the sound of the organization, not knowing that something had just happened in one small part of it. 20 Marines stood at a brief table. One man sat with a folder shaking in his hands, and I sat at the foot of the table where they had put me, and I did the hardest thing, which was nothing, which was to let it land and not soften it and not sharpen it, to let a man meet the full size of what he had said and what he owed at the same time. Prosser stood up. It took him a moment, and when he did it, he did not do it easily, and he did not say he was sorry first, because he was a Marine, and there was a thing that had to happen before the words. And the thing that had to happen was that he came to attention. He came to attention in front of me, the way you come to attention in front of something too large for language, and he held it, and his jaw was working, and I understood that attention was the only sentence he had that was big enough, and I let him hold it. At ease, Gunnery Sergeant, I said, quietly, after a moment, because you do not leave a man at attention while he is trying not to come apart. He went to at ease more or less, his hands not quite finding parade rest, the folder still in one of them. It was Vandenberg who said the thing the room needed said, because a sergeant major always knows the thing the room needs said. He stepped forward from the edge, and he spoke to the table, not to me, in the flat, carrying voice of the senior enlisted Marine in the battalion. For those of you who don't know what you just heard, Uricy, he said, in 2010, a rifle squad held a corner in a city a lot of you have read about, so that a platoon across the street would not be taken from behind. The squad leader was killed. A sergeant took the corner and held it until first light with what she had left. The platoon lived. 30-some Marines went home who would not have. He looked at me and then back at them, and he let it land. The Marine Corps gave her the Navy Cross for that morning, She is your new operations officer. You will not find a better one, and most of you will never work for anyone who has been closer to the thing we are training for. That is who is sitting at the foot of your table." A young Marine near the middle, one of the ones who had laughed, said, before he could stop himself, in a voice that was mostly awe and a little bit horror at himself, "That was really you, ma'am." "It was really me," I said. "I did not dress it up and I did not wave it off. There is a false modesty that is its own kind of vanity, the aw shucks that makes other people carry your discomfort for you, and I have no use for it. It was a long time ago, and it was the worst night of my life, and I would rather you knew me by the plan I am about to help you fix than by a citation. But yes, it was me." And then Prosser spoke finally, and his voice was not the voice from the top of the brief. It had lost all of its volume, and what was left underneath the volume was a smaller and truer and more frightened man. "I was there," he said. The room turned to him. "Second platoon. I was a boot. 19. He stopped and swallowed. "When the corner started to go, I thought we were done. We all thought we were done. And then it held. All night it held." He looked at the folder in his hand and then at me, and his eyes were wet and furious at themselves. "I have told that story 100 times. I never knew your name. I have been alive for 16 years because of that corner, and I just stood here and asked you if you'd ever been outside the wire. I want to tell you that there was a clean feeling in that moment, a triumph, the thing the thumbnails promise. There was not. What there was the oldest and most complicated thing I know, the thing that sits in the drawer with the letters, which is that the corner that saved Prosser is the same corner that cost Mercer, and that every room that ever stands for me is a room he is not in, and that I cannot hear the citation read aloud, not once, not ever, without hearing a big, easy laugh at a window on my right saying, 'You hold the corner, Sergeant. I've got the window.' He did have the window. He had it until he didn't. The young Marine who had asked if it was really me sat down very slowly, and I watched him do a thing I have watched 100 young Marines do in that moment, which is to run the last 10 minutes back in his head and find himself in it. Find the exact place where he had laughed along and go pale with the specific shame of having been part of a room that was cruel to something it should have honored. I did not want him carrying that. Shame is a poor teacher. It mostly teaches people to protect themselves, and I have never once seen it make anyone braver. So I caught his eye, and I gave him the smallest nod, the nod that says, "I saw you, and it is all right, and now you know," and I watched him take it, and I watched the shame turn into something more useful, which was resolve. He is the kind who will spend the rest of his career being the first to stand for the unlabeled person in the door, and he will not entirely know why, and the why is that morning. The 9 o'clock brief happened. It happened late, and it happened in a different room than the one that had started the day, a room where a gunnery sergeant introduced the operations officer to the arriving staff with a formality that bordered on reverence and that I had to gently turn down, because a plan does not get better when the person building it is treated like a monument. We fixed the thin places, some of them that morning, and the rest over the following week. The 11 minutes of no radio got a written instruction. The casualty route got moved to ground that would still be there in the rainy season. Ledbetter's overlay, reposted with the boundary fixed, was clean. But that is the plan, and the plan is not the story. The story is what happened by the hatch at the end of that first day when the watch floor had thinned out, and I was closing my folder, the same folder, and I felt him waiting before I saw him. Prosser stood by the hatch with his cover in his hands, turning it, a big man made small by a day, and he waited until I looked up, and then he came over, and he did not know how to start, so I let the silence be there until he found it. "Ma'am, I owe you—" "You don't owe me an apology, gunnery sergeant," I said, and I saw the surprise on his face. "You owe me something harder than that, and I'll tell you what it is in a minute, but not the apology. The apology is for you, not for me, and I don't want it." He absorbed that. He was quiet for a moment, and then he asked me the question that told me he was worth the trouble, the question that a smaller man would never have asked, because it was a question that gave me the power to hurt him, and he asked it anyway. "How do you stand it?" he said. Hearing it read. I watched your face when I read it. It didn't look like it does when they hand a guy an award. It looked like it hurt. He swallowed. "How do you stand to hear that citation at all?" And I decided to tell him the truth, because he had earned the truth by asking the hard version of the question, and because there was a young corporal on that staff who was going to spend 3 years watching how Prosser treated me. and the way I answered this man by the hatch was going to travel through him to everyone he taught. "Because they read the wrong name," I said. He looked at me. "The citation is mine, and I earned it, and I will not pretend I didn't, because pretending is a way of making other people comfort you, and I don't do that anymore." I closed the drawer in my mind and opened it again on purpose, the way I make myself do, because a thing you refuse to say out loud is a thing that owns you. But the corner that held, the one you're alive because of, cost a lance corporal named Isaac Mercer. He was 21. He was at the window on my right, and he fed me magazines when my hands were full, and he talked the whole time to keep us both breathing, and he told me to hold the corner. He said, "I've got the window, go," and I went. And the corner held and the window didn't. My voice did the thing it does, which is to get very level, because level is how I carry it. So I stand at gunnery sergeant by making sure that when they read my name, someone in the room learns his. That's the deal I made. That's the thing you owe me, not an apology. His name, carry it. Prosser was crying now, openly, a big, loud, certain man standing in a hatch with his cover in his hands, crying, and he did not wipe it, and he did not apologize for it, which was the first entirely right thing he had done all day. "Isaac Mercer," he said. "Lance Corporal Isaac Mercer." "Lance Corporal Isaac Mercer," he said. "I'll carry it, ma'am. The rest of my career, I'll carry it." "I know you will," I said. "That's why I told you." We stood there a moment longer, and then he asked me the second hard question, quieter than the first, the question underneath the question. He asked me whether he should have known, whether there was something wrong with him, that he had stood in front of the person who saved his life and felt nothing, no pull, no recognition, just a new woman in cammies he could put in her place. And I told him the truth about that too, because it was a truth he needed more than he needed comfort. I told him that he could not have known, that there was no face to recognize, that I had been a voice on a radio and a thing that happened in the dark, and that the reason it stung was not that he had failed to recognize me, it was that he had walked into a room and decided about a stranger, and the stranger had turned out to be the one person alive who could show him the cost of deciding about strangers. I told him the lesson was not learn to recognize the heroes. The lesson was stop deciding you already know who is in front of you, because you never do, because everyone at every table is carrying a drawer you cannot see, and the only safe assumption is that the quietest person in the room has paid the most for the right to be quiet. He nodded, and he put his cover on, and he squared it, and he went back out onto the watch floor, a different Marine than the one who had run the brief that morning, and I closed my folder, and I let the day be over. That is what I mean about the difference between recognition and revenge. I could have finished him. I could have had him standing at attention crying in front of the whole staff and left him there. I could have written him up, ended his time as operations chief, made a story out of him the way he had tried to make a story out of me. It would have been just, in the small way that a settled score is just. But it would not have been true, and it would not have kept a single Marine off a wall, and it would have taught the corporal watching that the point of being right is to be able to hurt the people who were wrong about you. The point of being right is not to be able to hurt anyone. The point is the corner. The point is the plan. The point is that the 11 minutes of no radio now has a written instruction, and the casualty route is on ground that will still be there in the rain, so that some other 25-year-old sergeant in some other river city does not have to hold a corner alone because the people who built the plan had never watched a plan die. Over the weeks that followed, the workup exercise came and went, and Prosser ran the brief table differently. He asked before he decided. When a new attachment walked onto the floor unlabeled, a warrant officer nobody recognized, Prosser was the first man on his feet, and I watched him catch himself doing it and understand why he was doing it, and I saw the lesson take. He came to me one morning, near the end of the exercise, a little sheepish, and told me he had saved the seat at the head of the table, that it was mine whenever I wanted the floor, and I told him to keep running the table because he ran it well, better than well, now that he had learned to run it without the contempt. And he did. There was one more thing he did later that told me the lesson had gone all the way down and not just skin deep. During the exercise, a young female corporal came onto the floor as a liaison from another unit, and one of the Marines at the table, not thinking, said something to her in the exact register Prosser had used on me that first morning. The little unkindness dressed as a joke, and I watched Prosser turn on him faster than I could have. He did not make a speech. He said one sentence, low, the kind of sentence that ends a thing. He said, "You do not know who that is, so you will treat her like you do not know who that is," which is with respect. And then he went back to the board, and the room recalibrated around him, and the corporal was treated like a Marine for the rest of the exercise. He had taken the specific thing that happened to him and turned it into a general rule and started enforcing the rule on other people. which is the only proof that ever matters that a person has actually changed. Anyone can be sorry. Sorry is cheap, and sorry is mostly about the person who is sorry. Prosser did the expensive thing, which was to become the man in the room who stops it from happening to the next person, and I would take one of him over 100 apologies. I took Corporal Ledbetter aside during a lull, the way a staff sergeant named Ruiz once took me aside in a different war, and I told him the thing Ruiz told me, which is that in any room there will be someone loud who is sure about you, and that you will be tempted to get loud back and be sure about them, and that the temptation is a trap because loud and sure is a game the loud and sure man has been playing longer than you have and will win. The other way, I told him, the way that actually works, is to be quietly, relentlessly, verifiably right, and to let the room come to you. Because a room always comes to you eventually if you are right long enough, and when it comes, it stays. And the loud, sure man's respect, once you finally have it, is worth more than his friendship ever would have been. Ledbetter's overlays were flawless by the end of the exercise. He is going to be very good. I intend to be somewhere I can watch it. Lieutenant Colonel Halsey signed the fixed plan. The battalion was better for the morning. A gunnery sergeant called me a tourist because the room learned a thing it needed to learn, and I would rather a room learn it from a survivable embarrassment on a watch floor than from the unsurvivable version in a river city at 0440. I think about that a great deal. The two ways a room can learn the same lesson, the cheap way and the expensive way. The expensive way is the wall at 0540, is a mother's letters stopping after 3 years, is a count that will not go forward in a gray morning. The cheap way is a hard 15 minutes on a watch floor where a loud man reads a page and goes pale, and a room stands up and a young corporal decides who he is going to be. Given the choice, I will take the cheap way every single time, and I will absorb whatever it costs me to make the cheap way happen, because the cheap way is the only mercy the expensive way ever buys. Mercer bought a platoon. If the platoon he bought spends the rest of its collective life being the kind of Marines who do not decide about strangers, who write the 11 minutes of no radio into the plan, who move the casualty route off the low ground, then he bought more than a platoon. He bought every Marine those men will ever lead, and that is the closest thing to getting him back that this world is going to offer me, and I have made my peace with taking it, because the alternative is to let the corner have cost nothing, and I will not let the corner have cost nothing. I did not come to that battalion to be recognized. I have spent 16 years being extremely uninterested in being recognized. I came to make the plan good and to keep another Isaac Mercer off another wall, and the standing room and the shaking folder and the crying gunnery sergeant were not the point. They were just the day the room caught up to a truth that had been sitting quietly at the foot of the table the whole time. I still get to the wall at 0540. I still check for his name where it will never be, because checking is a prayer for people who do not pray. And I have learned, over a very long time, the one thing I want to leave you with. If you have ever been the quietest thing in a loud room, sized up by someone who never once thought to ask your name, you do not owe the room your history to justify your seat. You do not have to open the drawer and spread the worst night of your life on the table to earn the right to be there. The seat is yours because you earned it, not because you can prove it. And the proving is a tax the loud and sure will always try to charge you, and that you do not, in the end, have to pay. Sit down at the foot of the table if that is the only chair they give you, and take it the way you take a seat you have decided not to give up, and do your work, and be quietly and relentlessly right, and let the truth do the standing for you. It will reach the room. It always reaches the room. And the people worth keeping will be on their feet before you have said a single word in your own defense. Hold your corner, say their names, and let the truth do the standing for you.